All right, friends, you should see the screen now. I'm just going to talk a bit in the beginning, trying to give us a grounding around AI and the impact in education research. And then really, I want to hone in on some of the last two slides where we can hopefully have a conversation about the future research agenda. So many of you may or may not know, but the reality is that AI has been around for quite some time. In fact, it's been around since the 50s. And Alan Turing is, kind of the godfather of AI. And back in World War II, they were trying to break codes. He developed a computer that allowed the other team, our team, Americans and the Allies, to break the codes. And he said that the future of AI or computing would be that we could essentially develop artificial intelligence. And he developed different tests that would hopefully allow us to get to general intelligence. Now, we're in an interesting state in history right now where some folks think that we're there and other folks think that we're not. But here's just a kind of a brief timeline of AI in your life. So it's really an interdisciplinary play across computer science, cognitive computing, machine learning, neural networks, natural language processing. And we have things that are really simple. So if you've used your cell phone in the past and you've looked at your phone with your face or your thumbprint, that's one-to-one AI. That's a real quick and easy use of machine learning to say, yes, this is the person that belongs to this device, and it opens up. If you've used Grammarly or Word or any other sort of word processing program in the last few years, you've probably seen word prediction, whether it's in your actual document or on your phone when you're doing text messages. We've now entered a world where we're in a generative GPT. And what does that mean? That basically means that our word prediction has gotten so good that we're able to create mountains of paperwork. We're basically able to create paragraphs, pictures, videos, solve math problems, physics problems. It's become that good. But how did we get there? Well, what we did is, and not we, meaning we meaning the computer scientists and engineers, the technical folks, have taken super large data sets. They've scraped the entire internet and any type of written blog or content on a website. They've gathered news information, newspapers, news clippings, magazines, anything that's in print, they've essentially consumed to train these different technologies, these LLMs, these large language models, to then allow you to get to where we are today, to where we can do a lot of really cool things. For example, we can personalize instruction and feedback. We can write narratives. We can talk about developing new programs that have never been developed. Even if you don't know C#, C++, or Python languages, you can use LLMs to develop those right now. You can translate across multiple languages with Google Translate and other different LLMs. You can look at developing automatic podcasts based on papers. Some of the work that we have on the CIDDL Center has exactly some of these great podcasts on recent great articles that we're putting out there. It allows you to solve word problems and provide step-by-step instructions. And you can even ask LLMs to write better prompts for the future so that you can become more efficient. So really, it's come a long way. It's not perfect. And so there are a lot of extremely interesting ideas that are coming across the table in our field and across the nation in different areas of research. What hits home in the world of education right now is some of the big ideas that I have here listed, but this isn't just a snapshot. This doesn't consume the whole thing. For example, ethical and societal considerations. I use the word considerations for my friend James Basham because that's his favorite word. But what does it mean to use large language models and AI in the school system? What are the policies around that? We don't have a very solid foundation in the United States. Now, there are documents at different states that are being developed to provide guidance and policy around that. But what does that mean for individuals with and without disabilities? What does that mean for administrators? What does that mean for teachers of the future? We don't have a solid research foundation around what that looks like and what that will mean for the future of our instruction. On the cognitive and psychological side of things, what does it look like around transfer of knowledge? So if I have a group of students who is engaged in leveraging AI, maybe to learn STEM content, does that then generalize over to a lab setting where they may not have access to an LLM, or maybe it's a different look and form factor? We really don't have any of those underpinning research foundations to say, yes, this is an evidence-based practice. We have a lot of promise. We have a lot of accessibility options. We have personalized learning that we're really excited about, but we really have no firm foundation right now on what that will impact look like for our students. In addition to that, we're starting to dabble in the world of multimodal data. And what does that mean? That means multiple sources of data coming in to a system, which could be heart rate, which could be galvanic skin response, which could be eye tracking, emotional recognition. How do those variables play in the world of large language models and AI? What are the ethical implications around that? Do we want to have philosophical conversations like, does creating a faster human make sense? Yes or no? I don't know. These are a lot of exciting questions, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second if I can find the right tool. Oh, here he is. And see, in the audience, what are your basic research questions that you may or may not have? And I think we have a few things in the chat.
So, Trey, one of the things that's kind of come up in the chat, and which is, I think, a top area that we get questions with all the time. Emma asked the question, are there any projects that are investigating the impact of AI, generative AI bias on teachers' database decision-making for students with disabilities? Matt and I had responded that up to this point, we don't have any of that. We don't know of any of these, any of this research going on. However, I will say, and I'll try and find it while we're on here today, that a report came out last September. And if you don't know this, probably many people in the chat do know this, that there are systems that are watching and providing, helping schools provide for safer environments by monitoring kind of what's going on in their environment. A report came out last September, I believe, that kind of indicated that these systems are learning a lot more on students with disabilities than other students. It's not been fully investigated, but that report came out and kind of indicated that students with disabilities are being alerted on a lot more. We don't know all the implications of that, but I'll try and find a copy of that report and get it into the chat for people. That's a great question.
Related, I think one of the exciting things and scary things at the same time is that, for the first time in our history, we have the capacity to gather a massive amount of data and make predictions about performance. And that performance is going to be scary in that, what does it mean, for example, to be engaged? We have this notion that engagement is a really important variable with learning. But if I have a person who is 100% engaged versus an 80% of the time engaged, there's a lot of questions around not only how long you can sustain an effort like that, but then two, what does that mean in the end product of learning? And the whole notion around our assessments being really confusing because they're traditionally paper-based assessments, what happens when we start infusing all of these other variables into play? And how does that look like for our children of the future in school? So these are all like basic, exciting things that I'd love to hear pushback or thoughts from the audience if there are any. And you don't have to be scared. If not, I'll go into an applied setting too, because we actually have some fun stuff that's happening at UCF um, around that. But before I go anywhere, Sheila says, just thinking about engagement for the range of learning, think about kids with autism, right? Well, any sort of neurodiversity, right? We're going to have students with varying needs, not only in the digital environment, but in terms of the pedagogical sequence in which we deliver our instruction. And can we predict future responding well? Probably. But where are those roadblocks? Like, what's an acceptable level of performance for someone that maybe has a slower processing of mathematics versus someone on the other end of the spectrum? And how do we make sure that we address the needs for both of those students because they're going to be varied, especially in this digital environment? And that's where I think some of the promise around personalized learning is going to come into play. But at the same time, we also have to figure out, what are those ethical implications there? Do we want to burn our kids out real quick and maybe they have no future? Or how do we pace our instructions so that they actually have the fulfillment of a real life to do a bunch of other things? Pushback, thoughts?
I know Emma jumped on. I don't know if you want to follow up with your question.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the report. And I wasn't sure if the report about over-identification of students with disabilities and the security, is that in this report or is that a different?
Jamie, you're muted.
We reference it in the report. I'm looking for the source document now. I think it came out last September, and I wonder if any of our team members remember that report that came out about the alert systems, behavioral alert systems. We'll get that out to you, and if you don't get it before you leave today, make sure you leave your email, and we can send you a link directly.
Yeah, thank you. And I could I'll follow up by saying the reason I'm interested in this question is because I saw some articles in Nature, or one preprint and then one article in Nature that just talked about how some of the efforts to mitigate bias have not been as effective as anticipated. So I think that special education researchers' interests in being able to collect audio and video data is going to outpace their understanding of the risk. And so I'm just, yeah,
So
I'm just curious about that.
Emma, that's a good question. There's a group of us here on the call and beyond that just submitted an application to conduct some research using multimodal learning analytics to better map classroom environments. And what's interesting about what you're saying with AI and what's come out of Nature, essentially in working with computer scientists, when software systems are developed, they go through a validation process, which is a straight sort of A to B sort of line that's developed and that kind of defines the constraints the system can operate under. What's kind of come out as AI has become more autonomous is that it makes it very difficult to go through the formal validation process using more formal methods, because essentially the more autonomous they become, the messier it gets. I mean, that's the simplest way to say it. But a primary issue, and kind of what Trey was getting at a few minutes ago, in supporting the validation process is we need the core understanding, the basic research that supports what these environments are made out of, like what variables operate when and how, et cetera. That's kind of more it's not as applied as we do and have historically done in special education and educational research. And so it makes it difficult, even more difficult, as we think about how to validate these AIs and to make them more trustworthy and even unbiased. So the research that we just proposed doing actually recently kind of gets into how do we actually go through and measure environments to make sure that we understand the core sort of DNA, if you will, of a learning environment to ensure that we can provide and support safer and more valid and less biased AI. And that's an ongoing process. As I kind of said in the chat, one of the issues that we're running into right now is the industry is much further ahead. And as you were kind of saying as well, the industry is much further ahead than what social scientists and educational researchers are even considering. And so there's only a few people that are really trying to figure out kind of how that works. And in fact, if you look at the job listings, because I was looking at those earlier today for one of our students that's graduating, our field's not even really thinking about it in the future of who we're hiring. And yet this is going to be a major impact to education, special education and students with disabilities overall. And so it's a major, major area that you kind of brought up. There are some sort of interesting pieces and frameworks for thinking about creating safer AI. So AI for education, which colleagues of ours run, and we're working with them very closely on this. Resource is located here. On creating safer AI. So the team over at AIforeducation.org, Jody and her team, are developing and thinking about frameworks that support this sort of work. And actually, the CIDDL Center as a whole is undergoing this process for one of our projects in which we are developing a personalized learning coach for educators and faculty members as they think about the use of technology or AI in their classrooms. And we're supporting how do we go through quality assurance efforts around that. Additionally, as another resource, we're going to resource people up today. The OECD has some work on policies and data and developing trustworthy AI, which again doesn't quite get at the bias. I mean, one of the things we have to recognize is that the large language models of today are based on human data. Humans are biased, therefore the AIs that we train on that data are going to also be biased. So
Well, it's also,
yeah, Trey,
it's also very much a white male dominated industry, and that has direct implications on the data. So for example, on this particular slide that I have up here, I asked the DALL-E to create a classroom, a diverse classroom that was obviously working with technology, and I wanted a diverse teacher. Well, it gave me a white teacher the first time around, and it gave me a white female teacher, and I had to give it more instructions. Said, no, 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 I want the teacher to be African American. I want it to be male. I wanted to have a diverse student body. And I had to stipulate exactly what I wanted. If I left it up to interpretation, it would give me all white individuals, which is an interesting outcome. But the reality of the data sets that these LLMs and AIs were built on. And so as we continue to iteratively evolve these different models, we have to give it and be cognizant about how we train these models so that they incorporate a diversity and represent the totality of the human population as opposed to one segment. And, we are also doing some interesting studies at UCF around the data grab that's going on right now for the entire world. And so earlier I said these models were historically trained on what's open in the internet. Now they're going after data that's not open. So for example, you as researchers or scholars in the field write papers. You write a paper, you submit it to a journal, you sign away your IP as soon as it gets published. Well, those then go to a journal house or a publishing house who then ask universities to pay subscriptions to get access to a compendium of research-related manuscripts. On the back end, there's this little thing called an API, which allows you to get access to these journals through a digital means and train up models. We started at UCF following the cookie trails of APIs to see who's getting access and who owns access to all of these journals. And what we're finding is really fascinating. And that is Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, and other big LLMs are establishing deals and working with these publishing houses to own, either outright own these companies therefore getting access to all of our research for free. And then two, it's an IP grab. They are looking to train these new models. And so as the next iterative designs come out, we're going to see better and better outcomes. But there are philosophical questions around that for ourselves. What does it mean as a researcher to then give my journal article to a particular publishing house, get siphoned to an LLM who belongs to a corporation, not to a scientific community anymore? What are the ethics around that? What does it mean for the future of tenure and promotion? How do we decipher impact factors of the future when right now it's about citation source? Well, I'm here to tell you right now that that can be manipulated very easily, and folks do that now. And so how we look at quality of manuscripts, the future of tenure promotion, all of those have direct implication on our field directly, as well as the future of new faculty coming into the fold and having an understanding of what that means on a technical side. Some other really fascinating, I think, applied research topics that you're starting to see some of them pop out in JSET, and some other include things like implementation strategies, like how are we going to effectively integrate AI into existing curriculum? Are there really neat tools? I think Sam on the call here has done a lot of great work on showing you a bunch of different tools that you can incorporate into your pedagogical sequence. But you can do applied research in those settings. What sort of professional development do you need to do, technical assistance at a school level to provide teacher support, student support? Those are great, applied research topics that can go on into any different topic area. From the assessment and evaluation side, we have a large lift here. Like, what does it mean to have assessments in the world of AI? Because right now, AIs can pass the bar exam, the medical exams, better than most humans. And so what does that mean when you have a student who's engaged in calculus, for example, and they have to write problems, but they're using AI to do that? Is that the same thing as leveraging a calculator? Probably not, because it's a little bit more sophisticated, but how do we assess performance in the future? What does that look like for accessibility in terms of evaluating skill sets? Are we going to see the future workforce have a side-by-side where we have a human and an AI working together? Or is it going to be human only or AI only? And what does that look like? Those are all great research topics we can have in the future. Policy and regulation, there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done here. What does that look like for the future of funding for IDEA, the funding for different OSEP grants or IES grants or NSF grants around regulation and use of AI? There's basic and applied research questions there. How do those regulations ensure equality and access to students who may or may not have access to either devices or the internet? There's a lot of foundational work that needs to happen there. On the technological development side, we have a significant need to know about how we're going to create user-friendly environments of the future. Right now, we have these LLMs, and we have the power. We have a student and a colleague of mine that wanted to create a calculator in Python language that was going to support students with dyscalculia. And one of the evidence-based practices is having different colors associated with different numbers so they could see that 9 was blue. Well, we looked around the market and we couldn't find an actual calculator to buy. And so we said, well, let's make a digital one. And none of us know how to program in Python, yet we went to an LLM. We asked it, what's the best way to write a prompt that would incorporate a Python code to develop our idea? And within 30 seconds, we had a working prototype. And so if you have ideas like that for tech development, historically you would have to hire a programmer and spent lots of dollars trying to create that widget or project. You can do that now with a computer, with AI, and probably have a working prototype within a few minutes. And so what does that look like in terms of equity and equality and instruction? a lot of really interesting, questions. And then how do we harness the AI to, reduce educational disparities among different socioeconomic groups across different types of institutions, whether they're in rural locations, urban locations, suburban locations. Those are all just high-level questions that I'd love to hear some feedback from you in the audience. Matt, do you want to talk about, or did he leave? I didn't know if Matt wanted to talk about his dyscalculia calculator, but that was a cool little piece.
There's an interesting question in the chat, Trey, from Jason that I think brings together two really big issues right now, the cell phone issue and AI.
Yeah.
Want to talk about that?
Yeah, so let me read it real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry, I could have totally read it out loud.
That's right.
Can AI be used to address the cell phone issues in schools by tracking student off-task use of phones and interaction
Yeah,
during school hours while still allowing for the use of student phones for assistive technology and educational use?
right.
I mean, so there's some philosophical conversations around that. There's policy conversations. So like, I would say right now, first time in a long time in history, we've had this device in our pocket, and it has more power than what we put someone on the moon with. We have access to the open web, all of the knowledge, LLMs on this device. Now, unfortunately, these devices are not owned by the institutions like schools, and so they can say, put it up, don't use it. But I would say conversations like, how do we best engage the use of a cell phone? How do we enhance personalization? What are the right resources? Can we track it? Yes. That's not a hard thing to do. There's some privacy concerns around that, like who owns the device, who has access to the device. Will parents give you a school access or a teacher access to their personalized data? So I would say there's a lot of discourse that needs to happen in that arena. I would say that, we seem as this is a kind of global observation. We seem to fear the use of this technology for some reason for the last 20, 30 years. And I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's because we have done a poor job of educating our teachers how to best use this technology and have access to such power. When rural schools don't have enough computers, but every kid has a phone, that kind of makes me wonder, like, well, why can't we change our philosophy of thinking here and engage a different way of pedagogical sequences?
Well, Trey, you've heard me. First of all, Jason, I would look at the report I shared out just a few minutes ago that gets into some of the issues and privacy issues around behavioral tracking, et cetera. But Trey, you've heard me get on my soapbox before, and I think we should publish something on CIDDL about it. Here I'm holding up a pen, right? Or another writing instrument. I can get a pencil that's next to me as well. How long do we teach kids how to use these things? It takes almost a year or whatever to teach kids how to use pens and communicate effectively with pens. How long do we teach kids how to use one of these effectively in their learning? Being a cell phone, mobile phone, a smart device. We don't. In fact, for the last few years, I've been asking my undergrads, how many people before, as their pre-service educators, how many people in this classroom were prepared to use mobile phones in their own learning effectively? And in 3 years, I've asked that question. I've had one hand go up and then say, oh, my teacher talked about it one time, and here's how they. So we spend a lot of time teaching kids how to use pens and writing devices to communicate and to support their own learning. We spend very little time, if no time, teaching them how to use phones effectively. And then suddenly we're wondering, well, why do we have problems with phones in classrooms? I mean, it's a pretty obvious sort of answer to me. It's like, if no one teaches them how to use phones effectively and these devices effectively, well, how are they supposed to learn? And so it's a major, major issue in our schools. And rather than dealing with the issue, we're kind of putting our heads in the sand and saying, oh, let's just pretend they're not there. in reality, it's a major issue in our schools that we need to confront it on how to use these things effectively rather than running away from it.
And the irony is that AI is in a similar path, right? We have the release of ChatGPT a few years ago, and some of the knee-jerk reactions were, we're going to ban the internet. You're not going to have access to any LLM. The reality is that these technologies will continue to evolve and be ubiquitous across all of our populations. And if we don't come to an agreement on how to best leverage this technology for the betterment of human capacity, we're going to be left behind, or our children are going to be left behind. And I think it's in our best interest, and this is just my viewpoint, that we have to change our traditional modality of instruction, and we have to evolve with the times.
And we should also say, by the way, and I put it in the chat a while ago, but our common disclosure that we're a cooperative funding agreement funded through the U.S. Department of Education. However, the contents that we discuss here in this office
Are my
hours
opinions.
are our opinions and do not necessarily represent the policy or opinions of the U.S. Department of Education, nor should it be assumed the endorsement of the federal government. So we always have to say that in all the work that we do.
Yes, thank you for that disclaimer. Other topics, I mean, I don't know, Angelica, how much time we had left.
Yeah. So we can wrap up the formal conversation and say, this is the end. I'm going to stop the recording, and we appreciate you all being here today. If you'd like to hang on to have some more informal conversation with us, we'll stick around for a couple more minutes. And as Sam mentioned, and I also put into the chat, please fill out that form. We just want to keep track and have conversations after this. Please join our community. The link is also in the chat so we can continue conversations there. And we will have these informal office hours regularly. So make sure you're checking back and adding it to your calendar.
And I'm going to